Okay, in this video we look through Unit 3 for the higher human course, specifically the memory section. We're going to try and concentrate just on short-term memory in this video, and in a follow-up we'll do long-term. So part of the course is that we need to understand that memory includes our past experiences, knowledge and thoughts, and that there's three stages to memory. There's the encoding, where the memory goes in, the information goes into your memory. It has to then be stored, and it has to then be retrieved. There's ways to make all three of these stages easier and more effective. And obviously, if any of these three stages don't work or there's a breakdown, then the memory won't work because it's either not been encoded, stored, or retrieved properly. In short-term memory, information is encoded into our short-term memory. It has a limited capacity to store the information. The capacity is usually somewhere around 7 plus or minus 2. So it's likely that most of you can either remember 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 items at a time. Information is lost from our short-term memory by two processes. There is displacement, where, let's say your memory capacity is 7. When an eighth piece of information enters your short-term memory, one piece is lost from the original 7. So it's been displaced. Decay, so over time, even if you only have your 7 pieces of information in short-term memory, over time they'll start to fade unless you embed them or encode them into your long-term memory. We can do several different experiments that will talk about our short-term memory. So our short-term memory. In the first experiment, there's a video attached to the assignment slides where I read out some numbers very slowly and boringly. I deliberately use random numbers, so there's no pattern. When we go and talk about chunking, we can use things like patterns to aid in chunking. The information is read clearly in a uniform speed, just by me. That's because any change in inflection or speed can bias the remembering of the numbers. And why did you have to lay your pencils and pens down? It's to stop you getting tempted to cheat. So I said there is chunking. That is breaking information down into small, easy to remember chunks. Usually when you read a phone number out for someone, you give them the area code first. So 01738, 01259, whatever. These are little chunks you can remember. And then you might break the next 6 numbers down into two groups of 3. So 343, 218. And then the person on the phone can go, okay, 01259, I've got that, it's the area code for Alloa. And then 213343. It's something we naturally do, and it's called chunking. So if you rehearse these kind of numbers, you can encode it shallowly into your memory, and it makes it stick around just a little bit longer. We have the serial positioning effect, so that's the fact that if I read you out 20 numbers, that obviously massively exceeds the capacity. Doesn't matter if you're an amazing rememberer, your short-term memory probably only has about 9 items. So by the time we get to number 9, you're probably struggling. So the first, somewhere between 5 and 9 items, people then tend to do quite well with. This is because of something called the primacy or rehearsal effect. So these first numbers, it's actually quite entertaining. When you do this experiment with someone, they naturally start to repeat them to themselves. They go, okay, it's a duck, a boat, a book, a duck, a boat, a book, a sledge, a duck, a boat, a book, a sledge, a television. And then eventually they run out of the ability to do that. So the rehearsal primacy effect is depleted. In the middle, people tend to look a little bit lost. They're vainly trying to remember anything that you can. Occasionally, you get a little bit of a bump up with some of these kind of things. So it might be that the items have been very boring, and then suddenly I see a can of Coke, and they think, oh, God, I could really go a can of Coke. And that gives it something that we'll talk about later, a kind of bit of a context cue for them to remember it. But generally, you get this drop, and then the last few items, the person maybe doesn't know that these are the last few items of the list, but they're at least quite recent. when you finish reading them out. So people tend to remember the last few items that you read out. And this is again part of that short-term memory span. The ones that are rehearsed may slightly have been encoded into long-term memory, and the ones that are recent are in that kind of 7 plus or minus 2 items you can get in short-term memory. So words at start remembered well through rehearsal, words at the end remembered because they're recent, and words in the middle quite often forgotten. We have a working memory, which is a kind of an extension of our short-term memory, which allows us to perform simple tasks like processing, manipulating, controlling information. So when you read a sentence or a word, you're not actively trying to remember it when you read through it. But by the time you get to the end of the sentence, you can usually remember the overall, maybe not the words that were in that sentence, but the overall meaning. This is part of your working memory. We won't talk about long-term memory. One thing we'll just quickly go back and cover is your sensory memory. So your sensory memory contains everything that your body senses. If you put your hand flat on a table, your body senses that for a very short period of time. If nothing particularly interesting happens to clue your mind in to the fact that that information was important, you won't really remember it. In class, what I quite often do is I get students to look around the entirety of the class from the board in front of them all the way around in a clockwise direction. And then when they look at the front, I ask them how many DNA nucleotides were stuck to the back wall of the classroom. And usually nobody knows, because although they perceived all of the information, it was in their sensory memory while they were looking around. There was nothing that clued them into the fact that that information was particularly important, so they didn't concentrate on it, and it didn't get encoded even into their short-term memory. However, if when they scanned around the classroom, they saw there was a hole in the back of my classroom and Mr. Jones's face was staring through it, that would have been quite interesting and slightly disturbing. So they probably would have focused on that and remembered it when they got back to the front of the classroom. So the sensory memory takes absolutely everything in, but because of the vast amount of information, it's everything you see, smell, hear, taste at all points in your life, it can't hold that. And it only lets some of the stuff through into your short-term memory. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. We've talked about the sensory memory, we've talked about the stages of memory through encoding, storage, retrieval. We've talked about the fact that memory is past experiences, knowledges, and thought. Talked about sensory, the fact that it's such an overwhelming amount of information that it can only store everything for a very short amount of time. Short-term memory is just a limited capacity, 7 items plus or minus 2. You can improve your short-term memory through things like chunking. And short-term memory is affected by the serial positioning effect, where things that you hear at the start of a long list, you remember because of rehearsal, things at the end are recent, so are in your 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information, and the ones in the middle you forget. Working memory, an extension of the short-term memory, is used for kind of short cognitive tasks. If any of that, hopefully some of that made sense, then if it didn't make sense, watch the video again, watch the other summary video on the topic that will be posted next week, and ask me, obviously, as a final thought if you don't know.